Hello and welcome to the A-rated Rogan series, where we upgrade my 1960s house that had more work done to it than a Celtic Tiger A-lister to be a thermally efficient family home. In today's episode we renovate our badly converted garage extension to be a guest suite. I hope. Let's get into it.
So this is a big scope. Where do you even start? I found it was useful to kind of set out the scope of work and the objectives to kind of separate things out and then deal with the duties and how you do it later. So here we have what we looked like before. Ugly house, laid out as it was. We knew, roughly speaking, that we wanted to do something with the side extension because it wasn't fit for purpose as it was, composed as it was. We could see like basically 4 different structures hobbled together. And we also wanted to do something with the kitchen. And we were doing these together, actually, as it turns out, on our builder's advice, because you're going through major disruption. You may as well do it all in one sitting, and it's handy to be able to move trades from one space to another depending on relative maturity. So this is what we had, and in kind of floor plan scale, we had the kitchen here with a hot press in the middle, and we knew about that. That was a difficult one. A little door at the back and a window. And then we had the side extension, which was composed of the porch, which is just a glass lean-to that leaked. We had a main structure of a porch. We had a converted garage with a boiler house, and this had a big honking huge poured slab concrete roof. And then we had an oil tank room which was scabbed onto the rear, and then a supplemental roof was put over these because the concrete roof obviously failed over time and leaked, and that's what we started with. In this case, we went for planning permission, and we didn't, strictly speaking, to achieve these scopes of work, need to get planning permission because there was there's in our local authority, you can convert a garage to be habitable space, and indeed that had been done in the past. You didn't need planning permission for a porch to the front, and anyway, it was done basically in the 1990s, early 1990s, from what I can ascertain. So we're well past any kind of time limit. But I figured it was no harm to just accurately legitimise what we would have. If we ever come to sell the house in future, at least there's absolutely no ambiguity. So went to an architect, a colleague of mine that I'd worked with many years ago on industrial projects, and he started putting together a few plans for us. So he demonstrated, this is what we're going to remove, the roof to the side extension here in this nice isometric. We also took the opportunity to, by the way, upgrade the roof over a little bay window so that it would be insulated. And the one thing that actually truly did require planning permission was, I'm not the world's greatest driver in the world, and the piers for the parking entrance were quite narrow. And if you ever widen an access road in Ireland onto a public roadway, you have to get planning permission for that. So we figured, we're going for planning, we may as well do something that we can only requires planning. And then this is what we wanted. We wanted a flat roof, and we wanted the boundary wall that we had already raised and leveled out. You can kind of see the shadow here, with a cap on the top of it, so that if the neighbours ever do anything, they can tie into this as well. It's nice and clean and simple. And also, as you'll see in a few minutes, there's very good details on how to do insulation, kind of standard details, in context with this kind of flat roof abutting a wall arrangement. And we also went in for a bicycle store and a bin store, just while we're at it. So this is, roughly speaking, a plan view, and you can kind of see the existing structure, and then this is where we were going. And I did want a few roof lights. Natural light helps hugely with just making the place nice. In terms of internal layout, this is where we would end up with. We would have a much wider but simpler entrance with a draft lobby, and we wanted a roof light here because particularly with this main hallway and the original house, it can get quite dark, so we did want to kind of have some way of casting light into this deep planned space. We also wanted to have an ensuite and to turn this main space here into a bedroom / study, and that's indeed what we use it for. When people visit, they can have their own separate space. We wanted a few windows here to open out to the garden, and while we were doing the kitchen, we also wanted to put in some French doors to open it out to the rear, just to get a lot more light in. It's north facing, so you kind of have to do the best that you can. In order to get from where you are to where you want to go, you have to figure out your path. And what I find useful is to sit down and detail out the specific scope interventions required to do that. To split it out among the major trades. This takes the form of just scope bubbles on a simple layout to show what is or isn't wanted. No one's ever going to read this. It's much as an aid the memoir to yourself while you're doing the works, to make sure that everything is thought about, and to the kind of standard and the design why you want to do things. But it's a very helpful exercise, and you can do things like specify up what kind of insulation we wanted, for example on this boundary wall, or the fact that we wanted to externally insulate everything else around the house. Or indeed to when we put down a suspended timber floor here, and indeed the rest of the house, to make sure that we put insulation and air tightness below it. And it's just a very handy a tool to make sure you get everything down on paper, share it with the builder at the start, make sure that the price is accurate, and then you can figure everything else out as you go along. And you can do the same as well for plumbing, and go through everything that way, including, for example, radiators. I ended up buying them all, but it's very good to be able to refer back to these types of documents to make sure that when you go off and buy your bathroom suite or your kitchen, that you've factored in everything that you want in terms of the backup services to help you along the way. And the same with the electrical, although in practical terms you're going to walk around the shell and core space with a big marker and mark what you want and where, but this is a good reminder to make sure you've teased out everything that you need. In a prior video in this series, I would have spoken about mechanical heat recovery ventilation. So I installed mechanical heat recovery ventilation to the upstairs of the house, and indeed to the kitchen. So this is just the conclusion of those works. And then finally, something approaching a contract is very important to have, just to detail down, these are the expectations of both parties between the builder and yourself, what the scope split is or isn't, just so that you can refer back to things. There are proper formal ways of doing this. I've gone with a builder that I knew in the past and I trusted, but it's still no harm to write these things down, and any quantity surveyor will advise very, very strongly on this, and in particular the scope split, to say what the client's going to buy and free issue for the builder to install, and then what the client is going to buy and get installed by specialists, is very good to just delineate. So once you've kind of detailed out your scope of works, what are the kind of the specific requirements that are placed upon you as a domestic builder, basically? What do you need to bear in mind while you're doing it and how you do it? So I suppose the first thing to mention is under building regulations, technical guidance document part L, they have this concept of a major renovation, and you can get triggered by that when more than 25% of the surface of the dwelling envelope undergoes renovation. That kind of commits you to doing a couple of things which you need to plan for. One of the main things is you need to make sure you've got electrical vehicle recharging infrastructure. That's fine. You then have to do a couple of other special things. So if you're doing any of these things, or building a new extension, which in this case we basically are, we're replacing an existing extension, but either way, between the balance of these, we are triggering, we're doing major renovation. You need to make sure all of your U values for your roof are up to scratch. Your oil, boiler and controls need to be triggered for upgrade. This building regulations technical guidance document L is very useful to read. It has a few other little tips and tricks inside it that you need to bear in mind. About pipe work dimensions. If you are going with a heat pump, it needs to be kind of inch copper, fully insulated. Or so you may be asking, why am I getting into all of this? Surely there's a simpler way to do this, and indeed there is. So the SEAI, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, they have this concept of a one-stop shop, whereby, as the name implies, you go to one provider and they just do everything for you. But I didn't want to do that in our case, because I'd heard anecdotally from colleagues who had done it in the past that the project management costs that these one-stop shops apply, it typically outweighs any kind of financial benefit from the grants available through the one-stop shop. And also, I wanted to split up some of the works and combine it with some renovation, for example the kitchen, or indeed the side extension. And it's just the principle of having multiple contractors working on the same space together. I wasn't able to rationalize those two topics. So unfortunately in my case, one-stop shop I wasn't going to go ahead with. But there is, depending on what you're doing, still grants that you can avail of. So with the insulation, we obviously needed to insulate the house. It was still, block work. I wanted to go with external wall insulation. I had it in a previous house for 10 years and it was transformative to the quality of life. And indeed there still is a grant available to do it, external wall insulation, the wrap as they call it, and for a semi-detached or in the terrace house it's €6,000. But for my purpose, the advantage of the SEI grant isn't so much the grant, it's the fact that the contractors that are executing the works, they have to do it to an extremely high standard and they are regularly audited. This current house that we did it in, it hasn't been audited, but certainly the last house we did it in, SEAI audited that house. So there's a good chance that your house will be picked out for audit to make sure that the quality is top notch. And along with doing it with SEAI, they obviously have technical standards that they need to follow, and it can be very handy when you're planning for a handoff between a domestic builder and an external wall insulation contractor to just have a perusal of the of these standards to make sure that in your main building works that you're interfacing correctly. So for example, I had already in a prior upgrade works, I'd updated the downpipes and soil and vent pipes for the house and to put them proud of the wall to make sure that the external insulation could go easily around it. And I did scope in this case for replacing the gutters for the house and the soffits and indeed the barge boards, because if you're going to abut external wall insulation and against these things, you need to make sure that what's underneath is to a high standard. So when detailing up what you want from your external insulation, the best bet is to basically get onto a couple of companies out there, ask them to quote you, and indeed we did, and they indicated a few bits and bobs that we needed to upgrade. Like for example, the front of our house has a cavity between a decorative blockwork and the actual supporting blockwork. They pointed out the finish they expected to receive from the builder for the side extension so that they could adhere to it. So they're just small little things to bear in mind. There are a couple of other documents on the technical guidance documents that people can get a lot of use from. So again, under technical guidance document L, they have what's known as acceptable construction details, which can be useful in scoping up your project. So there's one particular one here on external wall insulation that had 2 details in it that I found very handy and showed him to the builder, and he was very happy to follow. So in my case, the existing house is based on having a suspended timber above a void. It was back pre-radon barrier days. This was the radon barrier to just ventilate the joists rather than, radon rising up and dampness rising up and people standing on it. But you want to kind of insulate below the floor, and this just shows an acceptable detail of how to do it to show your air barrier. So you'll see in the shots of the construction how we follow this detail here. And similarly, because I wanted to go with a flat roof design, just for simplicity, it's important to make sure that you don't create a thermal bridge where the flat roof meets the wall. So the external insulation is shown on the outside, and then you overlap the eaves out a bit deep enough to get the external insulation in underneath, but you need to continue the insulation all the way through and over. And it's just a nice simple design to follow. And similarly, when you have a flat roof which has joins up with, in my case, a party wall, a parapet, you can have a nice little wrap over design here to make sure that you don't create a thermal bridge all the way up. So these standard details, the acceptable construction details, they're very useful to just give a sense of what you ought to be doing, and they're kind of pre-worked out for you. So that's kind of the building regulations requirements. There's a lot more to go into. You could really nerd out hugely on the SAI, domestic technical standards and specs. There's a lot of stuff in there. In terms of executing the project though, what do you need to think of? So the first thing is, if you're going for planning permission, first of all, establish whether you need planning permission or not. So in my case, Dunleary Rathdown County Council, they clarify what you do and don't need planning permission for. So can I build an extension? And there's requirements, 40 square meters, 25 square meters. There's a lot of clarifications there. And the one that tells me that if I'm widening a vehicular entrance, I do need planning permission. So that was kind of a key one for me there. The other thing is when you're executing the project, you kind of have some legal obligations to follow. In the first case, you have there's the National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office. So the idea is anything built in Ireland has to be done according to building regulations, and there's a national regulator who then subs out its duties for monitoring to the local authorities, and you have to kind of inform this national regulator that you are building. So you have to do a commencement notice, basically, to inform this party that you are building in case they wish to come around and inspect. Now, anecdotally, and certainly from my own personal experience, there's as much chance as Elvis walking down the front driveway as there is a local authority inspector. But nevertheless, if you ever come to sell the house, this is the type of thing that you are asked to produce documentation on, so it is important to do. You have to make sure that you put in a notice for low grade kind of domestic, building a house, building an extension. You don't need to have registered professional sign-offs at different stages, similar to you would for commercial or industrial or wide scale residential. But it is important, you follow those processes, and you just have to follow it. Similarly, for the Health and Safety Authority, again, this is a national body that have a particular responsibility, in this case for health and safety on a building site, and you need to make sure that they are aware that building is going on, so that they can call around and inspect, or indeed if something happens, there's an issue. You're far more likely to see these coming down your door or coming down your driveway, and they have a nice guide, I'll link to it, for homeowners, and there's a form to be filled out. And basically the trigger is, I think, if the construction is 500 person hours or, where is it? 500 person hours are more than 30 days. 500 person days or more than 30 days of work. You're kind of triggered. You have to follow their approach. But again, it's fine. You just fill out the form and let them know, and off you go. And then finally, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And I did find a company that could offer up insurance for doing self-build extension renovation insurance. And it's interesting, it's actually split into two. You have property insurance, so for insuring the property while it's been constructed, if you damage your existing property or indeed adjacent properties. But it also covers you for liability. Basically, you are an employer employing either builders or direct labour to work, or they might hurt someone out on the street. You have a lot of liability there, so there's kind of two insurances wrapped into one, and you can get it. And this was what I paid in late 2023. So for context, normal house insurance for the house at that time, if you're just living in it and contents and whatever, it was about 300 or 400 euros. So this kind of gives a sense of scale. So it might be 3 or 4 times your normal premium, but it lasts a year, and it's just important that you consider these types of things. And they'll give you a few statements. You have planning permission, or it's exempt. You can't do it mid-flight. It's going to be permanent residence. So it's a good idea to do things like this. So that's kind of outlining, in my case, where I wanted to get there, where I wanted to get to, how to scope it, and kind of some of the technical and legal requirements that are placed upon you. So let's see how the construction went. So, at the end of that very involved process, let's see how we got on. In the first instance, let's look at what we actually performed. We'll go back to our old logic diagram for that. How it impacted our energy consumption, the whole basis of this YouTube series. And then finally, what kind of tips and tricks would I give to people to do or to not do were they undertaking something similar based on our lessons learned. So in the first instance, what did we actually do? So this was the original logic diagram we had way back when at the start of the project, and you can see there's interlinks where you can do the easy stuff on the left hand side, and as it gets more difficult at the right hand side, there are predecessor activities that have to occur. So I'm going to fly through this and show what we achieved in this mini project. So as can be seen, a huge vast swathe of work was done, and we just basically we skipped over cutting between our kitchen and sitting room. We decided in the end not to do that to maintain kind of separate spaces. But we basically did everything we wanted, bar doing our sitting room renovation, which will trigger a future scope of works to replace floor coverings, and we're held fire on heat pump install. But everything else, we basically achieved what we needed in sequence. And that is a huge scope of work to take on, but it's important to kind of sit down and do this kind of planning so that you're not kind of tripping over yourself or trying to undo too much of work. In terms of how it impacted our energy, this is where it gets very interesting. You can kind of see previously we're kind of tailing off a little bit with what kind of scores we were getting, but this one got us right back into contention. So let's fly through and have a look at that on the SEAI's tool DAP. And so this is kind of where you start from, defining the house, defining the ventilation. So let's fly through and make sure all of this is fully correct. So for the floor, we lifted all the floors downstairs and we put down 100 mil of PIR insulation, and it dramatically brought down the heat loss to the ground, which helped a huge lot. So 256. The roof to the side extension, I worked it out with the extent of PIR and fiberglass combined that we put in. It came down to 0.2 of a U value, which dramatically improved this individual space. And we'll leave the walls alone for now. For now, I just want to get the basic building fabric without the external wall insulation so we can really see how it impacts the score on the right hand side. So let's just get the basics done. So for the doors, they were all kind of 1.1. And we in fact had an additional door here, and then the kitchen ended up, so this ended up being 1.85. And then the kitchen kind of were French doors, so they were larger. And you can kind of see, just even though we have more openings, our overall score is dropping down. And similarly with the windows, those windows which were inefficient are now much more efficient. And you can kind of see we're straight into C3 area. In terms of ventilation, the chimney, we blocked that up in a proper structural manner, as in it's draft sealed, and that knocked off the huge amount of stuff. And this is still correct. Ventilation, Ventaxia Sentinel, this is still accurate. Space heating, the only change we need to make here is we need to indicate that this boiler, after we installed a new large hot water cylinder suitable for a future heat pump, we did actually plumb it up so that we could heat it from the oil boiler. So we just need to update this here. Okay, and knock the few off there. Then if we go to the water heating, it was in fact a 250 litre one we fitted, and we did have this thermostat, boiler heat pump with insulated primary pipework. We actually made the decision to put in pre-insulated pipework everywhere, and it was much more useful that way. And was there a manufacturer declared loss available? So this is the standing water loss, 84 watts from our aerosol 250. $84 per day. So we're going to have to do a bit of a calculation here. And it's in kilowatt hours. So 0.084 multiplied by 24 hours in a day is 2 kilowatt hours per day. So that's incredibly efficient. Combi boiler, no. And we did in fact fit a third shower. So I'll do 3 there. Didn't make any impact there. And we don't have evacuated tube style. So to get to the basic building fabric upgrades that we made with the side extension roof and a heat pump ready hot water cylinder that's pre-insulated, running off our terrible old oil boiler, we got to 211.81, and that's roughly speaking where we are now. I'm going to say €3,000 for that. So to buy the tank was, I think, €700. It's hell to try break out the costs in order to fully say this. I mean, it could be multiple tens of thousands of euros to presume what's built in the side extension, the new windows, things like that. But let's keep things simple for now. The next thing I did was as a condition of the SEAI grant for external wall insulation, and this caught me out, as a condition for the SEAI external wall grant, once you are finished the external wall insulation, your house must get a minimum of a B2 BER, or you have to replace your boiler and your attic insulation to just barely meet current building rights standards. Now, what I was concerned about is I'd ran the numbers and I figured when we did the external wall insulation, we would get to a B2, bearing in mind we're currently at a C3. But I wanted a bit of insurance because it was marginal. I figured we would hit B1/B2, but I didn't want anything dicky to occur. And what I didn't absolutely want to do was to replace the old oil boiler with a condensing one, basically, which would meet modern building regs, because it would be money down a pit, bearing in mind that I ultimately want to do a heat pump, so I didn't want to waste money there. So what I did is I bought 4 number solar panels and put them onto my solar PV system using a second input I always had on a second MPPT, and faced them west. And certainly the side extension roof, I had specified the structure for that, and got windage calculations done and things like that. So let's put that in. So that got us from a C3 to a C2. Happy days, I'll take that. And it was really actually quite reasonably priced. But then for the big tamale, the external wall insulation. And as you can see, a huge result. My concern about getting to a B2 or not was completely incorrect. Dramatically better than that. We were down to an A3 rating, 61.26. And I'm going to flash up in a moment the actual BER assessor's results, because mine wasn't perfect at all, this calculation. I'm not an expert at all on the app, but the actual expert, you'll see just how good it was. So my calculation was a slight bit optimistic, 61.26, but the actual BER assessor calculated 72.95, but it was still an A3. I'm very satisfied with that. So in terms of the energy consumption reduction and indeed the carbon impact due to these works, I'm delighted with it. I didn't think I'd get a 1960s house to A3 with a boiler technology from 1989, but there you have it. Do the kind of 3 steps. Reduce your heat losses, number one, tons of insulation, tons of ventilation controls. Number two, control the heat that goes into the space very well. So we have very good controls on the boiler. And then the third thing is add plenty of renewable energy by virtue of us using the solar power. So as the light fades on this video, what are kind of the top 3 wins, I think, of the project that people can take learnings from? And what are my top 3 mistakes, more importantly, that people can take learnings from? I suppose in the first instance, it is of utmost importance that you look after your contractors. They're going to make it happen for you. You're not going to do everything by yourself. And if you have well scoped, well looked after contractors that, they have tea, coffee, toilet facilities. Toilet facilities are the main thing that contractors talk about. They're usually self-sufficient about food and drink, but half the jobs they go to, just no one tells them where the toilet is, or they get the vibe that they're not allowed to use it. Whereas if you offer it up, there it is, under the stairs, Lou, that's yours. It's just your space is their workspace. And just imagine, empathize, what would you want in a workspace? And these are the basics. And simple things like when you come home at the end of the day and you see they've executed a bit of work and you like a particular technique they did or something like that, just take a photo of it and text them, thank you, like this. Like I had a very nice one where the external insulation contractor did a particular extract vent hookup outside that had a little backdraft damper on it. They didn't have to do it that way. They could have just gone with a normal hole in the wall with a grill, but they have one that saves energy when the fan is off. So I acknowledge that with them, thank them. It's important that you look after your contractors and they will look after you. The second thing is logistics. They say something about wars are won and lost on the back of logistics. When the contractors are working, they need the materials in order to work. Some things they'll source themselves, some things they'll source themselves and need to store on site until they need them, and some stuff you'll source that they'll have to install, like think of bathroom suites or tiles or things like that. If you have this all well planned, it makes the job a hell of a lot smoother rather than start, stop and people getting pissed off. And the final thing, and it's kind of a nuanced point, but always prepare for future upgrades. So when you're executing things, try not to box yourself into a corner. Amazon, the company, they have a concept which I find very fascinating about one-way doors and two-way doors. Two-way doors are decisions that you can make that you can undo very easily. One-way doors are ones that you basically, once you make the decision and you go through that door, you're not going back out, or it is extremely difficult to go back out. And one way you can kind of apply that theory to a house renovation is think about potential future paths in the briefest possible terms, but to make sure that you could make changes in future. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Our side extension, it has a flat roof, and certainly I've put solar panels to the rear and I've put skylights into it because I like deep plan light. But the timbers are both sized and spaced and in position such that if I ever wanted to build up a second level, I could do using the timbers that we have already, could be the floor in future. And it's just so important to have that future upgradability without having figured out the full depth of detail, but just enough that you haven't backed yourself into a corner. And then I suppose those were the kind of 3 best things I think we did here and worked well for us. The 3 mistakes, and I say this sitting here in September 2024, basically 10 months after conclusion of the main upgrade project in December 2023. I've had a lot of time to reflect on this, and you'll see why there was such an interval for one of them. But I suppose the 3 for me, so the first kind of lesson learned that maybe I would approach in future, and I think this may have been a confidence thing, is I applied a very industrial engineering mindset to a domestic scale project about keeping systems live, which in retrospect probably wasted about 2,000 or 3,000 euros. So, for example, we have in our original renovation, which we did 2 years ago or whenever we did it, we did a shower room and a downstairs loo, and we had it plumbed through the house, through the side extension space, through a live construction area that we knew that we would be interrupting later. Yet I did go ahead and plumb those systems back then fully in the knowledge that I'd have to pull out half of the plumbing. It's a tricky one to resolve. With the benefit of hindsight, I would have deferred doing some of those plumbing works. But it was important for me at the time to have those systems working, even though I was going to disconnect things. So it's just be mindful that you're not spending too much money on kind of keeping things alive that you know you're going to do later. And I think there was uncertainty in our minds as to how far our budget would or wouldn't stretch. And that's why I did it, but maybe with a bit more self-confidence and reflecting on the fact that you can be actively saving while you're waiting, which I think a lot of people don't remember. We maybe could have saved a bit of money by not redoing work. So that's the first thing, waste of resources, keeping systems alive. Second thing, and I suppose this is advice my father gave me when we bought our first house 12 years ago. You should go as absolutely as far as you can. The rationale there is these projects, and I say this as someone in a professional sense that I work in very high demand, short time scale, high cost industrial construction. It's nothing new for me to be in very high pressure environments with construction. However, I can usually shut the laptop and put the phone away in the evenings, usually. Whereas when it's your own house, it's a different matter. You can never switch off. And the pressure, whether it's real or imagined from your family, and it's usually imagined, by the way, it's not actually the family holding you to account, it's self-imposed, is big. And you feel quite responsible for a huge amount of work, such that you want to get it over with. So it's tough to be as ambitious as you should be, but you absolutely should be. I'll give an example. We did all of the works to our ground floor, including a few little bits and bobs like replacing the floors in the hallway and obviously insulating at that time and replastering the walls and the ceiling in the hallway. We didn't do works we were considering doing in our sitting room to do kind of media units around the chimney. It would have been far easier to do it at that time than it will be now to spin up the project, the preliminaries, to do it. And I kind of regret not doing it now. At the time, and this is why I'm recording this 9 or 10 months hence, you are mentally drained, absolutely drained, because you can't step away from the project, ever. You can't get rest from it. But with the benefit of hindsight, I would have pushed even farther and done something, even though, you know, you're facing decision fatigue, you're worn out, you're not seeing the benefit for a long time of all the effort you're putting in. And the final lesson I want to impart is kind of, again, reflecting on the one-way door and two-way doors. In 2 or 3 areas, because my mind was focused on other topics related to the renovation, I took my eye off the ball on electrical services. Speaking as a past electrical engineer, it's very embarrassing, but on electrical services, I didn't test 1 or 2 comm circuits that I had wanted to install, and walls got closed up, and it's tough to go back and retrofit those. So I mean, I wish I had a comms point behind the television in the side extension, so that I could, you know, do streaming movies without relying on Wi-Fi. And it's just, do bear in mind the one-way door of closing up walls and floors and ceilings, that it will come for you, and the consequences of missing that can be very difficult to overcome. So thank you very much for following on in this series. We got to A. We got to A3. That's mission success. But there's one more step to do. That'll be the next video, where we'll do a heat pump. And between you, me and the wall, a heat pump is in fact fitted right now, and I'm loving it. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.